All right, welcome everyone to season 2, episode 5 of AVECO Economic Forum. I'm Akash Subramanian, your host for today, and we are discussing the budget of 2022. We had the second edition of a digital budget being used by our finance minister, Nirmala Sitharaman. And from the pivot of the pandemic, we'll be seeing a very interesting discussion about how the budget is becoming from a welfare kind of a budget to a capital intensive budget. It has been an interesting transformation. Just a note that we are not trying to rate the budget or give our positives or negatives. We are just trying to analyze how it is impacting us as students, us as people entering the corporate, and just a generic educational understanding. So we have two very interesting panelists with us today. We have Mr. Fareez Mirza. He's been on our platform for the first time, and he's a student of management from St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. Hi,
Hi,
Fareez.
hello.
We also have Mr. Varad Kukami. He is the co-founder of our channel, and he is currently pursuing his started accountancy. So
Hello.
let's get this session started, everyone. So Varad, I would like to ask you the first question here. Compared to the 2021 budget, where we were reeling under the pandemic, we needed a lot of subsidies, a lot of leverages in the economy. This year, our government has accelerated growth for capital investments and for infrastructure, both in a physical and digital manner. So, was this pivot from a welfare budget the correct decision, considering the pandemic is not over yet, and considering India has hardly recovered yet compared to developed countries or many other countries? India is still in the recovery stage. So do you think that was the correct decision, or we should have gone slower with the kind of investments that we were doing?
Yeah. So Akash, to answer your question, I would like to draw the viewers' attention to the fact that during the period of, I would say, NDA government, we have been seeing that the fiscal deficit was ranging below 6% from the year 2014 to 2020. However, due to the pandemic, we could see the government spending had to increase a lot to support the kind of operations, which resulted into a very high kind of fiscal deficit, and which went beyond 10% number, which is huge for a country like India when your GDP is ranging between $3 trillion to $3.2 trillion, and we are also among world's top seven economies. To elaborate my views further, I would like to say that in the year 2021, where the budget was introduced, it was a fantastic and successful one, I would say, in terms of handling the liquidity crunch in the overall economic system, which the government tried to tackle with the very expansionary monetary and fiscal policy, where the need was actually to put the money in the hands of people so that it would have a multiplier effect and would eventually create employment and eventually create the capital formation in the country. As compared to 2021 budget, I see India has now come out of the COVID reeling a little bit. Obviously, it will take estimated 5 to 6 years to exactly go to the growth range where we were heading to in the pandemic era. But in the year 2022, government is more focusing now on restructuring our growth model. In terms I would say that the budget is more focused on the growth side and less focused on the inflation side. As we all know, there are two legs of the growth story of any country, that is inflation and growth. If we see the developed nations like US and even European powerhouses like Germany, UK, then we see that their concern about the uh, public uh, public financial statements, that budget, is inflation. In the US, we can see the inflation is reeling around 40 years high, which should not be our point of concern in India, because we have to put more focus on the growth side of the card, because India has been seeing a rate of unemployment to be decreasing over a period of last few years. So to put the savings of the households in the effective entrepreneurship's hand, or to make that saving efficient to run the economy, uh, I would say that the budget has been really successful in that. So I
Right.
believe uh, government has taken a good decision uh, to make 2021 budget as a balancing factor between the lag which COVID cost and the reality. And now
Mhm.
in 2022, they are trying to project the future growth with
Mhm.
new measures which are more balanced.
Thank you so much, Varad. Your pointers are very, crisp, and you covered and compared both the budgets and gave the actual objectives behind them. Thank you so much. Fareez is building on to that question. We understood the physical infrastructure being developed right now, the Gati Shakti plan coming inside. But I would like to focus also on the digital infrastructure which our government is planning in various sectors. It could be for the blockchain and NFTs. It could also be for digitization in agriculture in different sectors, education, etc. So, what is your take on government trying to have a digital India, motion from 2022?
Okay, so Akash, when we look at the government's digital initiatives, we can look at agriculture, education, and our currency as well. So if we start with agriculture, we know that they're trying to promote drone Shakti or drones as a service. They're trying to get startups to build drones for agricultural activities. So that would include spraying pesticides, that would include mapping out lands and trying to resolve land disputes. It would also include delivery of certain services and products. But uh, you have to realize that when you bring drones into agriculture, you're not actually going to benefit the farmer or the man working on the field. What you're going to do is benefit larger organizations and these startups who are going to sell the drones. So you should not understand drone Shakti as anything which is really going to increase the revenue of the farmers. Now if we look at the initiatives in education, the government has realized that 2 years have been lost uh, by students because of the pandemic, but they aren't realizing that creating 200 TV channels is going to be the perfect solution, because TV, though it can be a perfect medium to communicate information to a small community, it's really not useful for education because of a one-way communication deal, right? So students cannot ask questions or interact with any professor. Even online education would have failed if it was a one-way communication. Uh, infrastructure was one-way communication. The government should focus on online education, especially since they're going ahead with 5G and auctions are to be over by 2023. So if they look at online education, start concentrating on online education and making uh, and allowing about 200 million schools who couldn't provide their children with enough education or enough facilities for education during the pandemic, if they can provide them with adequate infrastructure, they would really solve the issue we are facing in terms of education. And lastly, we have the RBI, who's going to introduce a CBDC, that is a central bank backed digital currency. And that will prove to be good, at least for the public who is so keen to enter the cryptocurrency space. And they are entering right now they are entering a cryptocurrency space which is completely unregulated and highly volatile. So once you have your RBI
Mhm.
backing, it will prove to be better.
Absolutely, absolutely. You give the three main sectors where we are trying to build a digital infrastructure. Digital India's innovation skill hub has been kept since 2014, since the Modi government has been set up, and since then, digital skills has also been promoted very well, and we are moving towards the right direction too. Considering the 21st era is totally about digital. So Before we move on to the internet and the digital aspect more, we would like to dwell on the conventional sectors right now. So, Varad, coming back to you here, with a view of a 5 trillion economy, the government's vision has been directing towards influx of money from foreign countries, from our own entrepreneurs, and has been focused on distribution for more businesses to be made. We see the investment in MSMEs, we see the investments in Startup India, and for various other startup sectors to build entrepreneurship. Does such programs actually promise employment? Because we see during the pandemic, the number of people who fell below poverty line was increased, right? So employment is also lost, and even though they're trying to promote employment in startups and in new ventures, does it actually help in promoting employment, or does the weaker sections of the society still stay below the poverty
Akash, I would like to, you know, talk few things upon the unemployment and the poverty line concept. The level of unemployment and the level of the youth of the country involved in the startup culture or new era technologies depends purely upon the skill that is actually influxed in the minds of youth in their young age. And as Fareez recently talked about the education concept, I believe that government should be focusing more on the digital education concept, because that technology or that thought process of online education can have a far-reaching impact. That is a very powerful tool which can be used, which we are seeing that government is trying to promote, or they are trying to develop their systems on the same. However, if I say that there is a company or there is a startup which has huge potential, if you say that there is a Google of India and they are trying to hire a lot of people, but if the country does not have that kind of skill, or the country is not mentally ready to adopt to the thought process that the startup culture or MSMEs are trying to bring into the countries, then I don't think it can actually help very much in the creation of employment. If I talk about a COVID scenario where almost 6 million Indian people fall below poverty line, uh, if I just exclude errors or omissions in the statistical figures, then I would say that that was more related to the amount of money which the domestic households were holding into their hands, but it was also related to the lack of cementing of the labor that is happening in the economy. If I say that being fired from a job just due to the COVID reason, then it's actually quite surprising, because corporate needs the talent, and no one would no one would ever like to go the great talent back. So coming back to my point, I would say that the startup culture, the investments the government is currently promoting into our economy is uh, is a good initiative by the government, which will eventually bring more foreign exchange reserves into our country. It will result in better outside debt financing. It will also result in real capital formation into the India, which will indirectly result in employment creation. However, that totally depends upon the skill that the country has, and which is also being developed simultaneously by the government, and that will take a substantial period of time. And India is currently in growth phase, so I believe we have a very bright future in this field, and India will achieve it.
Definitely, great pointers. Also, since we are having the target of 2026 to have a $5 trillion economy, that is why even our government is pacing towards, getting in more jobs and getting in, increasing the disposable income of people, getting in, different sectors and getting foreign players to help us build. Because even though India was struck by the pandemic, especially during the second wave, we were the quickest to recover even during the first wave and the second wave. So, economical wise, India never really faced a lot of reeling, a lot of recession. They were able to come out quickly from it. So, great point brought forward by you. Thank you, Varad.
Thank you.
Fareez, moving on to the next aspect. The since we are students, education is a very important pointer for us to discuss. And through all these years, the critique of government for not spending enough for development of education, either physical or digital infrastructure, has been constant. So even though increase in this year is a generous one, there's been an increase of 9,480 crores, if I'm not wrong, maybe I am, but that does not lie with the plans of digital education, the national economic policy, and the general holistic lookout for education. We often have that meme being created where Baiju's valuation is greater than India's budget for education. So, what is your take on it, and why is government not really investing heavily on education yet, even though it is on the utmost importance in their budget?
Firstly, our budget saw an increase, the education budget saw an increase by about 11% from the previous year. And we had a lot of focus on agricultural universities, digital education, skill development. But if we look at the breakdown of the education budget, we see that budgetary allocation for training teachers and adult education has actually reduced, and it's reduced from about 250 crores to 127 crores from the previous year's budget. So this brings us back to our first point of cutting down welfare expenditure with adverse consequences. And if we, look at education spending as a percentage of total expenditure, we've come down to below 10% now, where it was about 11.4%, if I'm not wrong. Your point about whether our budget adheres to the national education policy. So we know that in 2020, the national education policy was one of the biggest highlights, and the aim was to increase the expenditure to about 6% of the country's GDP, towards the education sector. But in our 2022 budget, we only see a 2% of the GDP being allocated towards education. So we're still not there yet. If we look at our, again, we know that digital e-learning is being pushed, and in spite of that, the PM e-Vidya scheme, allocation towards that scheme has reduced by about 200 crores rupee, 200 crores from the previous year. One of these solutions was the creation of 200 TV channels to promote DTH education. So even in states, they have their own TV channels now where you can have education in regional languages. Now, like I said before, television can be effective, but it really won't help for education. So the budget could have focused on online education, which has been growing all over the world, and it will grow even after the pandemic. So once 5G comes in and technology does become cheaper, online education will be a very viable alternative for traditional classrooms.
There are so many aspects in education itself which cannot be conquered online. It doesn't just restrict to information sharing, but actual holistic experience for teachers as well as students is important. And moreover, we see the divide where private education is what people prefer, even though they may not be able to afford it, but they make it a point to give their children the best education. And with that mindset, I don't think the government understands that uplifting municipal schools or colleges and building their infrastructure, their education, the way education happens there, even the state board examination, the kind of education given to them, it really needs an upliftment, because even though we are having the higher sections of the society become better with education, the lower education still has to strive to go to private or try to get out of their own comfort zone so that they can do better education wise. Otherwise, it's totally experience.
Right,
So
right.
that is important. Awareness of how to get people from the tier 3, tier 4 to actually indulge in real time education and get platforms to learn, not just classroom education, but even outside. That is important.
I would also like to highlight a few positives from our education budget.
Surely.
So Varad said that skill development is super important, right? For any corporate to grow and any country to go. So we are, the government starting 750 virtual science and mathematics labs and 75 e-labs for, people to train themselves in various skills in a simulated environment. and this will really reduce unemployment issues in the long term. And we don't have to look at the short term benefits of this, but such development of infrastructure will also pull in more private equity. So they are through this PLI, they are targeting the creation of 60 lakh jobs in about 4 lakh across 4 lakh industries.
We'll move on to the most critical aspect, especially for the Indian economy, which is the agricultural sector. The next question is for you, Varad. Now, agricultural sector has always been dangerous waters for the government during budgeting due to the tirade of the majority depending on its prosperity. We know 70% of India's population depends on agriculture, and it contributes to only about 20 to 25% of our GDP. Even then, the political connections and the general outlook towards agriculture is very tricky for our Indian government. So, do you think the various revisions related to Kisan programs, reducing the number of subsidies given in that area, and insurgency of technology in widespread irrigation, etc., would help increase production and protection for farmers? Or is it just going to increase number of rallies because there is not enough money influx from the government and for them to be able to make their days living out of it? What do you think?
Yeah, so Akash, as you said, the agriculture sector in India is one of the most prominent, sectors in the industry, even after the 75 years of, independence. Uh, to just highlight that the India is still, I would say, has its dependence rooted in the agricultural industry. And if you ever see the rural economy, the way it is functioning, the agriculture has very close connection with the kind of growth the Indian politicians can expect in the future. So about the government agricultural promotion schemes, I would say that we have been trying hard to achieve the use of technology in the industry, the quality of ingredients that are being used, the fertilizers that the government has been, trying to promote in the industry. All these things, are, uh, are costing clearly to the government, as well as I would say that with the passage of time, the farmers have also started using the new age technologies in the agriculture sector. In India, one more important aspect about the agricultural growth is our weather. In If you observe in countries like Europe, in countries in Europe or North America, their weather is more like constant throughout the year, which is a bit on colder side. Whereas in India, we have a versatile weather. We have all kinds of seasons in our country, which makes us able to produce a far variety of crops. We have been able to actually serve a mass population throughout the globe. Also, we are also exporting our agricultural products to a lot of countries in the world. So I would say that eventually these factors are the investments that the government is doing are turning out to be fruitful. At the same time, I would like to draw the viewers' attention to the fact that in the recent times, the agro-tech industry has also been in news, just because the fact that it provides growth or stimulus to the agriculture industry in the better pace than the government incentives. So agrotech is also the future of how our agricultural sector performs in near future, and that's all I can say.
Definitely, agri-tech is a very interesting point you brought forward because I think in 2020, the ET Startup Awards, the winner was an agri-tech company focusing on distribution of fertilizers, if I'm not wrong. I cannot recollect the name, but definitely agri-tech is getting importance, and with the drone assistance which is being facilitated now, agri-tech is going to improve more towards logistical aspects also.
Yes.
So definitely there are many more arguments that can be brought forward for agriculture, but right now with the leverages that has been given to farmers, I think they're still at a very stable point where they can still go ahead and, with the MSP that has been introduced and I kept constant, if I could say that. I think farmers still have a very flexible budget, a very secured bubble for them to function as the sector. So thank you so much for that. Fareez, I would like to ask you the next question. Now, it was evident when the government did not want prosperity amongst people to have an asset class as crypto, when they introduced taxability of 30% on them, but they also gave the permission for crypto to be a legal tender or digital tender when they introduce a digital currency or a digital rupee here. So what are your thoughts on the future aspect of digital rupee, the next 3 to 4 years? Will it sustain, or is government is introducing it because all the worlds have but is not making it prominent in our country?
First of all, there's a very heavy tax that's 30% flat and no deductions except for the cost of acquisition. But at least some people are relieved to know that crypto will not be banned in India. So if we look at now taxing of the digital assets, first of all, the finance minister has cast a very wide net over who all can be taxed. So not only is it sale of digital assets, but it's also if you exchange digital assets or you gift them to someone, everyone's going to be taxed, the receiver. And by disallowing set-offs on losses, so if you want to set off your loss in the next financial year on sale of a digital asset, you won't be allowed to do that. And that might sound harsh, and it's not in accordance with laws in other parts of the world, but it's the government telling you clearly what it likes and what it doesn't like. Okay, another concern raised is the blanket term of the word or the term virtual digital assets and any information code or otherwise. So nowhere do they actually mention cryptocurrencies. So this leaves virtual digital assets open to interpretation. So a clarification and specification of taxable assets is required so that the tax authority doesn't interpret at its own will. And that's one of the main fears for many investors and speculators. The next big news was the digital rupee, and we know that it will be the electronic legal tender form of the actual rupee, and it's going to be issued by the RBI. The rationale is basically to create a system which is more efficient and is cheaper to manage. So this is different from Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies because it will be backed by some kind of asset in one form or another. So you have currency reserves, bonds, etc. And it's going to be recognized by the central bank. Like I said previously, our country is not the first to experiment with digital currency. So it does seem like the trend for the future, and it's, I guess, high time. There are a lot of advantages apart from the obvious ones where the cost of printing notes is lower and you don't have to deal with damaged and lost notes. It'll also be far more accessible, and the government can penetrate deeper segments and bring more and more people into the fold of banking with the digital rupee. Of course, there are disadvantages as well with any new initiative where people are worrying about a lack of privacy and you leaving a digital footprint with every payment of food or lodging or anything.
So actually, talking about digital rupee recently, I had been reading about it, and that I found quite impressive. The rationale behind the bringing out of digital rupee, which is followed by China bringing their own renminbi, yuan in digital form. The basic objective, which I understood that RBI is trying to emphasize on, is that they are trying to bring more and more people, as Fareez said, in the banking channel. And how they are going to do it is, as I'll just give you a brief example on the same. Like whenever you go to any commercial bank to open your current account or your savings account, you're asked to maintain certain levels of minimum balance. In India, if you see, Indians, some Indians, which are earning to just meet their monthly or periodic requirements, they cannot. They actually live a paycheck to paycheck kind of lifestyle, and for them it is very difficult to maintain that minimum balance into their bank accounts, and that's what the central bank had been observing. And what digital rupee is eventually going to do is that it will remove the need of your minimum balance criteria in the bank, and your currency will be directly stored with the central bank under your PAN or your CBDC ID. So that's how I believe that is a fantastic step, and it will even cause some impact on the banking sector of India, which we will cover in some of our coming videos. But then I believe it's a fantastic step to bring more and more people to a banking channel, even when they are not able to maintain certain requirements as per commercial norms.
Definitely. Again, we see lots of positives getting into digital currency and digital banking too, as you highlighted, Bharat. Bharat, your take on this question. We have the new regime which was introduced in the last year's budget for taxability, and some people wanted relaxation since the pandemic was ending and was taking up their disposable income. They wanted relaxation in the taxability of 6+ lakhs of income. However, it was constant. There was no change, and the finance minister actually apologized live. She's not inculcating any change right now because the government had to allocate budgets elsewhere. So, what are your views on the rigidity of the taxes on individuals as well as on corporate taxability? And do you think there should have been more relaxation in the disposable income right?
So Akash, our finance minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said on record that she has actually apologized to the people that the government wasn't able to reduce the tax slabs in the current budget. At the same time, she said that I'm not at the same time increasing the tax rates also. So, considering the growth of India and the bottom line scenario in our country, I can say that if the tax slabs are moved or changed a bit, that can cause huge impact on the government's tax revenues. Tell you about the new regime and old regime. In case of individuals, then there was a section brought in by the government, that is section 115 BAC of Income Tax Act 1961, which actually brought a few criterias that would not give some benefits to the individual, but at the same time it will reduce tax rate and increase the slab rates. That in the real life scenario, I have seen that many individuals have been benefited by this clause, which is good for the people who are whose income is mainly ranging between 5 lakhs to 7 lakhs annually, and they are actually being benefited, which are and these individuals are mainly whom they are fixed income earners. Maybe they are retired people who are not having much expenses on their insurance or social securities. At the same time, if I talk about the corporate tax rates, and then in the budget of year 2019, we have seen the major tax reforms in the case of corporate taxation. And there was a scheme, which has been there for quite a long time now. That is minimum alternate tax, which the government had introduced earlier. Minimum alternate tax is a concept actually which means that you have to pay at least this percentage of tax from your profit which you are declaring in any type of financial statements you are presenting for the general purpose. And the differential in the MAT and your actual tax liability, for example, your actual tax liability was lesser than the MAT, then that differential was allowed to you as your MAT credit. In the scenario going forward, 5 years down the line, if I see the tax slab scenario, then I am not sure if the government will ever consider to reduce the tax slabs, because the kind of income declaration that has been there in India, there's less than 7% of the people actually file their income tax returns, and even less than that actually pay the taxes. In the economy of 150 crore, if we even consider 50% of the population to be efficient to earn money, that number of less than 7% is quite low. So in the coming years, we can actually conclude that the government will continue with these tax rates and bring some new schemes, like they brought the new regime in the previous year to facilitate or to soothe out the effect of inflation to a select class of people in the economy, and not to everyone as a whole. So that will help to reduce the tax burdens, at least on the people.
Definitely. Thank you so much for those insights. Definitely, people do not realize the amount that I think is given to the government and why it is important for them to have that kind of allocations. But once they get into the depth of how much money they do receive and how much from corporate, how much from personal, then they realize that it makes sense for them to keep it constant right now. So thank you so much. And just one more aspect which I would like to personally contribute towards. Now we see the budget being fair, just for the situation India is in, trying to be capital intensive, getting in growth right now. And the Gati Shakti program is actually inculcating that growth right now with tourism and hospitality getting the biggest aspects. The developments for Northeast, the allocations for them has increased, and we see the Statue of Equality being recently commemorated. So that is getting the view as to India is trying to get in tourism from outside. We have the projects for railways getting electrified. We have projects for ropeways also being initiated. So government is taking the next step for tourism. Beautification has been taken place in all the major cities across India, and it is being carried forward. And moreover, healthcare, even though hasn't been having a lot of major pointers getting forward, it has a very sustainable budget getting in there, with pharmaceuticals and hospitals getting a lot of incentives and subsidies right now. More especially economic zones being distributed in the last 2 to 3 years, it will be increasing now. So we see the government trying to get out of the scope of a socialistic kind of an environment, getting into capital, merging culture with technology. So it is a very just budget to be had in 2022. A step further taken, and maybe not ignoring all the values for social welfare. It has definitely improved its substantiality for getting people move forward with their economy and their sustainable lifestyle. So concluding with that, I would like to thank both our panelists here for being with us today, and all the viewers. If you like this session, do put in the thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. And if you want more such content, you can always put your recommendations in the chat box. And see you soon, and have a nice day.